My name's Emily, 32, standing at my wedding altar, heart pounding like a drum. Ethan's smile glows, roses fill the air. My dress feels like a dream. Everything's perfect, but my sister Clara in her bridesmaid gown has a glint in her eye. We've clashed since we were kids, her stealing my diary, mocking my secrets. Now, as vows near, I sense her staring, knowing something I've hidden for years. Suddenly, she steps forward, voice sharp, ready to shatter my day. Betrayal stings, doesn't it, if you felt it? Like and subscribe? Where are you watching from? Clara's voice sliced through the murmurs like a knife. She's not a successful lawyer. The words hung heavy and the room spun. Guests shifted in their seats, their whispers buzzing like static. Ethan's hand tensed in mine, his brow furrowing as he glanced at me, searching for an answer. My throat tightened, words caught somewhere deep. I was Emily, 32, the woman who'd built a life on a lie, and now it was unraveling in front of everyone I loved. I forced a smile, but my pulse hammered. Clara stood there, her bridesmaid dress shimmering under the chandelier, her lips curled in a way that screamed victory. She'd always known how to twist the knife. Growing up in our small Ohio town, she was the golden child. Mom Diane would beam at Clara's report cards, her piano recitals, while my sketches were tucked away, called childish. "You'll never make it with doodles," Mom would say, her voice sharp. So I left at 18, headed to Chicago, determined to prove them wrong. But instead of chasing art, I built a facade. I told everyone I was a lawyer crafting stories of courtrooms and cases because it made me feel worthy. It silenced the doubts Mom planted. Now Clara's accusation ripped that shield away. I glanced at Hannah, my best friend, seated near the front. Her eyes were wide, her hands clenched in her lap. She knew the truth, had known for years that I ran a design firm, not a law practice. She'd urged me to come clean, but I'd brushed her off, too scared of judgment. Now her gaze screamed, "Say something." But what could I say? The lie had grown legs, carried me through family dinners, job talks, even my engagement to Ethan. I remembered the first time I lied to him. We were at a cozy diner, rain tapping the windows, when he asked about my work. "I'm a lawyer," I'd said, the words slipping out smooth as butter. His eyes lit up, impressed, and I felt a rush of pride I hadn't earned. From there, it snowballed. Fake emails about cases, vague excuses when he asked to visit my office. I'd built a house of cards, and Clara was yanking out the foundation. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "You've been lying to everyone, Emily, even Ethan." Her voice dripped with mock pity, and the crowd leaned in, hungry for more. My cousin Lily, phone in hand, was filming, her face lit with the thrill of drama. I wanted to scream at her to stop, but my voice was gone. Ethan's mother, Margaret, sat ramrod straight, her lips pursed. She'd always been polite, but distant, like she sensed I wasn't quite good enough for her son. Now her eyes bored into me, confirming every doubt she'd ever had. My mind raced back to a family dinner last Christmas. Clara had probed, asking pointed questions about my cases. I'd dodged, heart-pounding, but her smirk told me she suspected something. Later, I found her rifling through my bag, claiming she was looking for gum. I should have known she was digging. She'd always hated how I'd carved out a life away from Mom's shadow, how I'd won Ethan's love, how I seemed to have it all. This was her chance to tear me down. I squeezed Ethan's hand, desperate for an anchor, but he didn't squeeze back. His silence cut deeper than Clara's words. I scanned the room, spotting my father Robert in the back row. He'd shown up uninvited, his gray hair thinner than I remembered. We hadn't spoken in years, not since he walked out when I was 10, leaving me and Clara, with Mom's bitterness. His presence now felt like a ghost, stirring memories I'd buried. Did he know my secret too? Was he here to judge me like everyone else? Clara raised a folded paper, waving it like a flag. "I have proof," she said, her voice loud enough to echo. My stomach dropped. Proof? What could she have? A fake degree? I'd never even made a lie. I'd only told with words. My knees wobbled, but I locked them, refusing to collapse. Not here. Not now. Hannah half rose from her seat, her face a mix of panic and loyalty, but a guest beside her tugged her back down. Lily's camera kept rolling, capturing every second of my shame. I opened my mouth, a weak Clara stop escaping, but it was drowned by the crowd's murmurs. Ethan's eyes met mine, his confusion turning to something colder. Doubt. I'd lied to him, to everyone, and now the truth was clawing its way out. Clara's smirk widened, and I realized she wasn't done. She was savoring this, ready to push harder to make sure I had nowhere to hide. My breath hitched as Clara unfolded the paper, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "This is an email from your so-called law firm," she said, voice dripping with venom. "They've never heard of Emily Harper." The room tilted, guests' faces blurring into a sea of shock. Ethan's hand slipped from mine completely, leaving my palm cold. I was 32, standing in my wedding dress, and the lie I'd spun for years was crumbling faster than I could catch the pieces. I tried to speak, my voice a rasp. "Clara, you don't understand." But she cut me off, stepping closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You've been faking it all. The degrees, the cases, everything." Her words landed like punches, each one heavier than the last. Margaret, Ethan's mother, stood now, her voice low but cutting. "Is this true, Emily? Have you lied to my son?" Her disapproval was a blade slicing through the fragile trust I'd built with her. My mind scrambled, clawing for a way out. I'd never forged a degree, never sent fake emails to Clara, but I'd dodged questions, spun stories, let people assume. That Christmas dinner flashed again, not the probing, but the aftermath. I'd overheard Clara on the phone laughing about checking up on me. She'd been hunting, waiting for this moment. Back then, I'd brushed it off, told myself she was just jealous. Now her trap was sprung, and I was caught. I looked at Ethan, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't said a word, but his silence screamed louder than Clara's accusations. I wanted to grab his shoulders, explain everything, how I'd lied to feel enough, how I'd built a real business despite it. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I saw Robert, my father, edging closer through the crowd. His weathered face held something, regret maybe, but it only deepened my panic. Why was he here after all these years? Did he know I wasn't a lawyer? Had Clara dragged him into this too? Lily's phone was still up her lens, a cold eye capturing my unraveling. I caught Hannah's gaze again. She mouthed, "You're okay," but I wasn't. The weight of every lie pressed down, suffocating. I told Mom I was a lawyer to shut down her comparisons to Clara. I'd told Ethan to keep his pride in me alive. I'd told myself it was harmless, just a way to survive. But now, it was a noose. Clara's voice rose again, relentless. "You've been playing us all, Emily. Even your precious Ethan." She turned to him, her tone mock-sweet. "Did you know your bride's a fraud?" Ethan flinched, and my heart cracked. I reached for him, but he stepped back just an inch, enough to feel like a mile. Margaret folded her arms, her whisper to a nearby aunt carrying across the room. I knew she was too good to be true. A memory hit me sharp and unbidden. I was 16, sitting on our porch, sketching a sunset. Clara had snatched my notebook, laughing as she showed Mom. "Emily thinks she's an artist," she'd mocked. Mom barely looked up. "Art won't pay the bills. Clara's got the real talent." That moment had fueled my escape to Chicago, my need to be more than the overlooked sister. But the lie I'd chosen, lawyer, successful, untouchable, had only chained me to their judgment. Now Robert was close enough to touch his hand, hovering like he wanted to speak. I turned away, unable to face him. Clara waved her paper again, her voice a taunt. "Go on, Emily. Tell them who you really are." The crowd leaned in, some with pity, others with hunger for more drama. Lily zoomed her camera, and Hannah's face hardened like she was ready to lunge at Clara. But I was alone in this. My lie exposed my life teetering. My eyes burned, but I blinked hard, refusing to cry. Clara wanted me broken, humiliated in front of everyone. Ethan's doubt was a fresh wound. Margaret's judgment, a salt rub. Robert's presence stirred ghosts I couldn't face. I had to say something, anything, to stop this freefall. But as I opened my mouth, Clara's smirk told me she had more, something worse, ready to bury me for good. Clara's smirk grew sharper, her phone now raised like a weapon. "I called your law firm, Emily," she said, voice loud and mocking. "They said no, Emily Harper works there. Never has." The words hit like a slap, and the room erupted in murmurs. Ethan's eyes darkened, his shoulders stiffening as he turned away from me. I was 32, my wedding day collapsing, and the lie I'd clung to was now a fire burning everything I'd built. I gripped the edge of my bouquet petals, bruising under my fingers. "Clara, you're twisting things," I said, my voice shaking but firm. She laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the venue's high ceilings. "Twisting, I'm just telling the truth. Unlike you." She swiped her phone, pulling up a screenshot. "Here's their response. No record of you. Explain that." Guests leaned forward, some craning their necks, others whispering. My cousin Lily kept filming her phone, steady capturing every shred of my humiliation. Ethan's mother, Margaret, took a step toward us, her voice icy. "This is unacceptable, Emily. Ethan deserves better than a liar." Her words cut deeper than Clara's, slicing into the future I'd dreamed of with her son. I'd spent months winning her over dinners at her house, careful stories about my cases, all to prove I was worthy. Now her gaze held nothing but contempt, and I felt like that overlooked kid in Ohio again, never enough for anyone. My mind flashed to the years I'd spent building this lie. After moving to Chicago, I'd started my design firm in secret, too ashamed to admit I'd chased art instead of law. But at family gatherings, I'd spun tales of courtrooms, briefs, victories. It was easier than explaining late nights sketching logos, pitching to clients who didn't care. The lie gave me armor, made Mom's comparisons to Clara sting less. It made Ethan's family nod with approval. But now that armor was shattered, and I was exposed. I glanced at Nathan, my co-worker, standing near the bar. He knew the truth, that I owned a thriving design firm, not a law practice. His jaw was tight, his eyes flicking between me and Clara, like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. I silently begged him to say something to tell them I wasn't a fraud. But he stayed still, unsure. Hannah, my best friend, was gripping her chair, her face a mix of anger and helplessness. She'd warned me this could happen, begged me to tell Ethan before we got engaged. I hadn't listened, too scared he'd see me as less. Clara's voice snapped me back. "You've been living a fantasy, Emily. And you dragged Ethan into it." She turned to him, her tone softening, fake concern dripping. "You didn't know, did you?" "She's been lying to you from the start." Ethan's head jerked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in minutes. The hurt in them was a punch to my gut. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low, barely audible over the crowd's buzz. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My lie had stolen my voice. A memory surged raw and jagged. I was 19 at Clara's high school graduation. Mom had thrown a party praising Clara's scholarship, her bright future. I'd just moved to Chicago, scraping by, and when I mentioned my art, Mom waved it off. "Clara's the one going places," she'd said, her voice final. That night, I'd decided to become someone they couldn't dismiss. The lawyer lie started small, a casual mention at a cousin's wedding, but it grew feeding on my need to outshine Clara's spotlight. Now that choice was choking me. Robert, my father, was closer now. His hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes unreadable. His presence was a fresh wound stirring memories of the day he left. I was 10 watching his car disappear, Clara crying beside me. She'd later blamed me, saying I'd driven him away with my neediness. Was he here to see me fall, to confirm I was the failure he'd abandoned? I couldn't bear to look at him. Clara's phone glowed as she scrolled, her voice rising. "You can't talk your way out of this, Emily. Everyone sees you now." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some guests shaking their heads, others whispering to their neighbors. Margaret's voice cut through again, sharp. "This wedding is a disgrace." My heart pounded, anger mixing with shame. Clara wasn't just exposing me. She was dismantling my life piece by piece, and I was running out of time to stop her. Margaret's words echoed in my ears, each syllable a hammer against my chest. I was 32, my wedding day a battlefield, and the air felt thick, like I was drowning in it. Clara lowered her phone. Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to crumble. "Admit it, Emily," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "You're nothing but a liar." The crowd's whispers swelled, a wave of judgment crashing over me. Ethan stood frozen, his silence louder than any accusation. I clutched my bouquet tighter, the stems biting into my palms. "You don't know everything." I managed, my voice thin, barely cutting through the noise. Clara scoffed, tossing her hair. "I know enough. You've been pretending for years, and now it's over." She turned to the guests, her arms wide like a performer on stage. "She's no lawyer. She's a nobody who fooled you all." A few guests gasped. Others nodded, their eyes flicking between us, soaking up the drama. My gaze darted to Hannah, who was now standing, her fists clenched. She took a step forward, but a cousin grabbed her arm, murmuring something that kept her in place. I needed her strength, her voice, but she was trapped just like me. Nathan, still by the bar, looked away, his shoulders hunched. He could vouch for my design firm, my real success, but his silence felt like another betrayal. Did he think I deserved this? Margaret spoke again, her voice low, but piercing. "Ethan, you can't marry someone who deceives like this." She moved closer to him, her hand on his arm, pulling him further from me. My heart lurched. Ethan's eyes met mine, but they were clouded with hurt, maybe even disgust. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, so soft I almost missed it. The question wasn't angry, just broken, and it hurt worse than Clara's taunts. I'd lied to protect us, to keep his love, but now I was losing him anyway. A memory clawed its way up, sharp and bitter. I was 15, hiding in my room after Clara spread a rumor at school that I'd cheated on a test. Kids had stared, teachers had questioned me, and when I got home, Mom just sighed. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" she'd said, her voice tired. Clara had always known how to make me small, to steal my light. Now she was doing it again in front of everyone, and I couldn't stop her. Robert, my father, was at the edge of the crowd now, his hands out of his pockets, his face tense. He opened his mouth like he might speak, but then closed it, stepping back. His hesitation was a fresh wound. I'd spent years wondering why he left us, why I wasn't enough to make him stay. Seeing him now silent when I needed him most confirmed every fear I'd buried. He was just another person I'd never been enough for. Lily's camera was still rolling, her face lit with a mix of thrill and guilt. I wanted to scream at her to smash that phone, but my body wouldn't move. The crowd's murmurs turned to open chatter, words like liar and shame floating through the haze. A guest I barely knew, an uncle of Ethan's, shook his head, muttering, "What a mess." My cheeks burned, the weight of their judgment pressing me into the floor. Clara wasn't done. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant just for me. "You thought you could outshine me, Emily? You're nothing. You always were." Her words were a mirror to Mom's old dismissals, to every moment I'd felt invisible. I wanted to fight back, to tell her she was wrong, but my throat was tight, my mind a blur of panic and shame. Ethan's mother tugged at his sleeve again, her voice insistent. "We need to talk now." Ethan nodded almost mechanically and started to follow her, his steps slow but deliberate. My stomach twisted as he moved away, each step a crack in the life we'd planned. I reached out my hand, grazing his jacket, but he didn't turn back. Clara's eyes gleamed, her victory complete. The crowd's whispers roared in my ears, and Robert's silence, Nathan's avoidance, Hannah's restraint, they all piled on a suffocating weight. Clara leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. "You're done, Emily. Everyone sees it now." Clara's whisper lingered, a poison seeping into my bones. I was 32, my wedding day, a public execution, and the room felt like it was closing in. Ethan was steps away, his back to me, following Margaret's lead. The crowd's murmurs were a dull roar, their eyes pinning me like a specimen. Then Clara raised her phone again, her voice triumphant. "One last thing, Emily. I found your little art website. A designer, not a lawyer." Pathetic. The word landed like a bomb, and the guests erupted, their gasps sharp. My heart stopped. She dug up my design firm's site, the one I'd kept hidden to protect my lie. I'd poured my soul into that business, every logo, every late-night pitch, but I'd buried it under the lawyer facade to avoid Mom's scorn, Clara's taunts. Now it was exposed, twisted into something shameful. Ethan turned his face, a mask of betrayal, his eyes searching mine for a truth I'd never given him. I felt my chest crack open, years of fear and shame spilling out. "Stop it, Clara!" I shouted, my voice raw, cutting through the chaos. The room hushed, every head swiveling to me. My hands shook, but I stood taller, the bouquet forgotten on the floor. "You want the truth? Fine, I'm not a lawyer. I never was." The admission burned my throat, but it was out heavy and real. Guests whispered, some leaning back, others wide-eyed. Lily's phone wavered, her filming faltering for the first time. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. "You lied to me," he said, voice low but sharp, each word a cut. Margaret folded her arms, her nod confirming her worst suspicions. I wanted to run to him to explain, but my feet were rooted. Hannah took a step forward, her face fierce, ready to defend me, but I shook my head slightly. This was my mess, my truth to face. My mind raced back to the early days of my firm. I'd started it in a cramped Chicago apartment, sketching on a second-hand desk, pitching to clients who barely gave me a chance. I'd won my first contract after weeks of rejections, a small cafe needing a logo. The owner's smile when I delivered it was the first time I'd felt enough. But I'd hidden it, told everyone I was a lawyer, because it sounded impressive, because it silenced Mom's voice in my head, calling my art worthless. Now Clara had turned my pride into a weapon. She laughed, a brittle sound. "A designer. You think that's something to brag about? You lied to everyone to pretend you're better than me." She gestured to the crowd, her eyes gleaming. "They see you now, Emily. A fraud." Her words were a mirror to every doubt I'd ever had, every moment I'd felt less than her. But something shifted inside me, a spark of defiance, small but growing. I looked at Nathan still by the bar, his expression torn. He knew my firm's success awards, big clients, a team I'd built from nothing. His silence stung, but I couldn't wait for him to speak. Hannah's eyes were locked on me, urging me to fight. Even Robert, standing at the crowd's edge, watched with something new curiosity, maybe regret. Their faces blurred as my pulse pounded, my fear turning to something hotter, sharper. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steadier now, loud enough to carry. "I built something real, Clara. Something mine." The crowd stirred, some guests exchanging glances, others leaning in. Clara's smirk faltered just for a second, but she recovered fast. "Real." "You're a joke," she snapped, swiping her phone again. "Let's see what else you've been hiding." My stomach lurched. What else could she have? My firm was my secret, my truth, and she'd already exposed it. But her confidence, the way her fingers moved on that screen, sent a chill through me. Ethan's eyes were still on me, his hurt now, mixed with something else. Confusion, maybe hope. Margaret's glare hadn't softened, and Lily's camera was back up steady again. The room felt like a powder keg, and Clara was holding the match. I took a step forward, my dress rustling, my hands no longer shaking. "You don't get to define me," I said, my voice rising, each word a release. The spark inside me flared, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my lie lifting, replaced by something stronger. I reached for my phone, tucked in a hidden pocket of my dress, my fingers brushing the cool metal. Clara's eyes narrowed, sensing a shift, but I wasn't done. Not yet. My fingers closed around my phone, the cold metal grounding me as Clara's taunt hung in the air. I was 32. My wedding, a shattered dream, and her eyes gleamed with the promise of more destruction. "Oh, Emily, you think your little art business is the worst of it?" she said, her voice a razor cutting through the crowd's hushed anticipation. "I found something better." She swiped her screen, projecting a photo onto the venue's wall, a grainy screenshot of my old blog, a post I'd written at 22 raw and unguarded, confessing I'd dropped out of college. The room exploded in murmurs, guests craning to read the words I'd buried years ago. "I'm lost," I'd written. "No degree, no plan, just sketches and fear." Clara's voice rose, mocking. "This is who you married, Ethan, a dropout who's been faking her whole life." My chest caved, the shame of that younger me scared broke alone, now a spectacle for everyone to judge. Ethan's face crumpled, his eyes locked on the screen. "You never told me," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it hit like a scream. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest, her disapproval now a public verdict. "A dropout," she hissed loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You let us believe you were educated, accomplished." Her words were a lash, stripping away the last of my dignity. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards. That blog was a time capsule written in a dingy Chicago studio. When I was scraping by waitressing to fund my first design software. I'd poured my doubts into it, thinking no one would care. I'd deleted it years ago, or so I thought, but Clara had hunted it down, weaponizing my vulnerability. My hands trembled around my phone, the spark I'd felt flickering under the weight of her attack. Clara strode closer, her heels clicking, her voice relentless. "You're not just a liar, Emily. You're a failure who dressed it up." She pointed at the screen where my words glowed like an indictment. The crowd's whispers turned to open chatter, some guests shaking their heads, others leaning to their neighbors, dissecting me. Lily's camera zoomed in her lens, a cold witness to my collapse. Even Hannah, my rock, looked stunned, her hands gripping her dress, unable to reach me through the chaos. A guest near the back, Ethan's Aunt Clara, barely knew, stood and muttered, "This is humiliating for the family." Her words were a spark to the tinder of the crowd, igniting more voices. How could she? Poor Ethan. My throat burned, tears pricking, but I blinked them back, refusing to give Clara the satisfaction. Robert, my father, was motionless now. his face pale, his eyes fixed on the screen. Was he ashamed too, or just watching his daughter drown? Clara's lips curled, sensing blood. "You thought you could fool us forever, didn't you?" she said, her voice low, meant to wound. "But I see you, Emily. We all do." She gestured to Ethan, who hadn't moved, his hands now in his pockets, his gaze distant. Margaret leaned toward him, whispering fiercely, her words lost, but her intent clear, pulling him further away. My heart twisted each second of his silence, a fresh betrayal. A memory surged unbidden of a night in my early 20s, alone in that studio, crying over a rejection email from an art gallery. I'd almost given up, almost called Mom to admit I'd failed. But I'd kept going, built my firm, won. Clients earned respect, all without a degree, all without their approval. Now Clara had reduced that to nothing, to a single blog post that painted me as broken. My phone felt heavy in my hand, useless against her onslaught. The crowd's voices grew louder, a chorus of judgment. A young guest, Sophie, who'd once looked up to Clara, stood frozen, her eyes wet with confusion. Even she was turning away, her faith in her mentor shaken. Nathan, still silent, shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty wavering. Hannah's face was a mask of fury, but she couldn't break through the crowd's scrutiny. Clara's eyes met mine, her victory absolute, her voice a final blow. "You're exposed, Emily. There's nothing left to hide." My breath caught my chest, hollow, every piece of me laid bare. The room spun, Ethan's distance, Margaret's scorn, Clara's cruelty, all crashing together. I was stripped raw, my past, a wound reopened my present, a ruin with no way to claw back what I'd lost. My words hung in the air, a declaration that felt like shedding a skin. I was 32, standing raw in my wedding dress, the crowd's eyes no longer a cage, but a stage. Clara's face tightened, her confidence cracking as I held my ground. "You don't get to rewrite my story," I said. My voice steady, each syllable a brick in a new foundation. I turned my phone toward the projector, connecting it with a quick tap, and my firm's portfolio filled the screen. Vibrant logos, sleek websites, testimonials from clients who'd trusted me. "This is what I built," I said, scrolling to a campaign for a local nonprofit, its bold colors glowing. Not lies, not tricks. My work. The crowd stirred, some guests nodding, others whispering with new curiosity. A woman near the front, an old colleague of Ethan's, murmured, "That's impressive." Her voice was soft, but it rippled, shifting the room's tide. Clara's jaw clenched, her hands dropping to her sides, her phone forgotten. I turned to Ethan, my heart a drumbeat. "I hid this because I thought you'd want someone else, someone polished perfect. But this is me." His eyes softened just a fraction, his hands loosening in his pockets. Margaret beside him shifted uncomfortably, her earlier scorn muted by the evidence on the screen. I didn't need her approval, but seeing her pause felt like a small victory, a crack in her armor. A memory surfaced, sharp and quiet. 2 years ago, I'd stayed up until dawn perfecting a pitch for a major client, a hotel chain needing a full rebrand. When they signed, I'd sat alone in my office, sunlight spilling through the window, and cried. Not from exhaustion, but from pride. I'd done that, no degree, no lies, just me. I'd never shared that moment, too afraid it wouldn't measure up to the lawyer I pretended to be. Now I let it fuel me. "Clara," I said, facing her, my voice calm but unyielding. "You wanted to tear me down, but you don't know me." "Not really." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Diane, our mother, stood near the back, her eyes glistening, her usual certainty gone. For years, she'd measured me against Clara, her praise a currency I could never earn. Now her silence was a question, and I didn't owe her an answer. I scanned the room, finding Sophie, the young girl who'd idolized Clara. Her face was a mix of confusion and awe, her hands clasped tight. "You don't have to hide who you are." I said my words for her as much as the crowd. "Not for anyone." Sophie's lips parted, a small nod forming, and I felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who'd ever felt less than enough. "Hannah." My best friend moved closer, her smile fierce and proud. "You're killing it," she whispered, her voice a lifeline. Nathan, now at the crowd's edge, nodded, his earlier hesitation replaced by resolve. "She's the best boss I've ever had," he called out, his voice carrying. A few guests clapped, tentative at first, then louder, the sound a balm to the wounds Clara had carved. I turned back to Ethan, my voice softer now, meant just for him. "I love you. I should have trusted you with the truth. If you can't stay, I'll understand." My throat tightened, but I held his gaze, letting him see me flawed, real, unhidden. His expression wavered, hurt, still there, but mixed with something warmer, like he was wrestling with what he saw. Margaret touched his arm, but he didn't move. His eyes locked on mine. The room felt different now, the air lighter, the crowd's judgment softening into something human. "Lily." My cousin lowered her phone completely, her face flushed with guilt, like she'd realized the cost of her filming. Even Robert, my father, watched with a quiet intensity, his hands no longer fidgeting, his presence less a ghost and more a man who might finally see me. I set my phone down on the altar, its screen still glowing with my work. The act was small, deliberate, a line drawn. I'd spent years running from my truth, building a lie to shield me from Mom's dismissals, Clara's rivalry, my own doubts. No more. I looked at Ethan, at the crowd, at Clara's faltering glare, and felt a quiet strength settle in my chest. I wasn't done fighting, but this moment, this truth was mine, and I stood in it, unbroken. The silence after my words was heavy, like the air before a storm. I was 32, standing at my ruined wedding, my phone on the altar, its screen a quiet testament to the truth I'd finally claimed. The crowd's murmurs softened, their eyes shifting from judgment to something softer, almost curious. Clara stood frozen, her hands empty, her earlier venom drained. I'd taken the stage from her, and the room felt different, like it was holding its breath. Ethan's gaze lingered on me, his hands still in his pockets, but his shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He didn't speak, but the weight of his hurt seemed lighter, like my honesty had cracked a door he might walk through. Margaret beside him sat down slowly, her face tight, but her usual sharpness dulled. The guests began to settle, some leaning back, others whispering with a new tone, less accusation, more intrigue. A man in the back. Ethan's old coach nodded slightly, his arms uncrossed like he was rethinking me. Hannah moved to my side, her hand brushing mine, a silent anchor. "You did it?" she whispered, her voice thick with relief. I gave her a small nod, my chest still tight but steadier. The truth was out, my design firm, my real life, and it hadn't broken me. It had shifted something not just in me, but in the room. A guest near the front, a woman I recognized from Ethan's office, stood and clapped her hands, slow but deliberate. Others joined the sound, tentative but growing, a ripple of respect I hadn't expected. Diane, my mother, was still near the back, her hands now at her sides, her eyes wet. She took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, her lips parting like she wanted to speak, but couldn't. For years, she'd built Clara up, left me in her shadow, but now her face held a fracture, a question she couldn't voice. I didn't look away, but I didn't reach for her either. This moment wasn't hers to claim. Clara's face was pale, her earlier triumph gone. She glanced at Sophie, the girl who'd looked up to her, but Sophie's eyes were on me, wide and searching. Clara's shoulders slumped, and she turned away, slipping toward the side of the room, her heels quiet now, no longer commanding. Sophie hesitated, then followed her, her steps unsure, like she was chasing a ghost. The sight stung not triumph, but a quiet ache. Clara had been my rival, but she was still my sister, and her defeat wasn't the victory I'd once imagined. A memory flickered soft but clear. Last year, I'd walked past a gallery downtown, its windows lit with bold prints. I'd stopped staring at a piece that felt like mine, vivid, unapologetic. I'd almost gone in, almost submitted my work, but fear had pulled me back. I'd told myself my firm was enough, that I didn't need more. Now standing here, I saw that fear for what it was, a tether to the girl who'd let Mom and Clara define her. I wasn't that girl anymore. The band, silent through the chaos, began to play again, a single violin weaving a gentle note. It wasn't planned, but it felt right, like the room was exhaling. Guests started to talk among themselves, their voices softer, less hungry for drama. A couple near the bar, friends of Ethan's, raised their glasses in a quiet toast, their smiles cautious but real. The shift was subtle, but it was there, a tide turning not fully in my favor, but no longer against me. Ethan took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "I need to understand," he said, his voice low, raw. "All of it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a thread I could hold on to." I nodded, my throat tight. "I'll tell you everything," I said, meaning it. Margaret watched, her expression unreadable, but she didn't pull him back. For the first time, I felt like I could face her not as the perfect daughter-in-law, but as me. Diane's gaze met mine, and she mouthed something. "Maybe I'm sorry, but I couldn't be sure." Her face was a map of regret, years of favoring Clara etched in her eyes. I didn't move toward her, didn't absolve her, but I didn't turn away either. The space between us was a wound, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. Clara was gone now, her absence a void in the room, and Sophie's trailing steps echoed in my mind. The crowd's chatter grew, the violin's notes rising, and I stood still, my truth a weight I could finally carry. Ethan's words, soft and raw, lingered between us, a fragile bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. I was 32, my wedding day reshaped by truth. The room a mosaic of shifting glances and hushed voices. The violin's notes faded, leaving a quiet that felt too heavy to break. I stood at the altar, my hands empty. Now the crowd's earlier judgment softened, but not gone. Their eyes held questions, not accusations, but the weight of their scrutiny still pressed against me. "Robert." My father moved closer, his steps hesitant, his coat creased from years of absence. He stopped a few feet away, his hands hovering like he wanted to reach out, but didn't know how. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, barely audible. "I didn't know about your work." His eyes, lined with regret, met mine, and for a moment, I saw the man who'd once hung my childhood drawings on the fridge. But that man had left, and this stranger's words felt like too little, too late. I nodded, my throat tight, unsure what to say. The crowd watched, some turning away, giving us a sliver of space. A woman near the back, a distant aunt, dabbed her eyes with a napkin, her face soft with empathy. The air shifted, like the room was exhaling years of secrets, not just mine. Ethan stood nearby, his gaze flickering between me and Robert, his silence a question mark. Margaret sat rigid, her hands folded, her earlier venom replaced by a tense reserve. A memory stirred, quiet but vivid. I was 11, a year after Robert left, sitting on our porch with a sketch pad drawing the oak tree in our yard. Mom had found me, her voice sharp. "Stop wasting time. Clara's practicing piano." I'd hidden the pad, my hands shaking, and promised myself I'd never let her see me dream again. That promise had grown into my lie, but now standing here, I saw it for what it was, a wall I'd built to keep them out and myself in. The guests began to move, some heading to the open bar, others clustering in small groups, their voices low but warm. A couple I'd met at Ethan's work party approached the man, offering a small smile. "Your designs are incredible," he said, his wife nodding. We had no idea. Their kindness was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the ache of Ethan's distance, Robert's late arrival, or the void Clara had left. I glanced at the side door where Clara had slipped out, Sophie trailing her. The image lingered, a sister I'd fought, a girl who'd believed in her, both now gone. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a strange grief. I'd wanted to outshine Clara, to prove I was enough, but her absence didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something I couldn't name. Ethan took another step toward me, his hands out of his pockets. Now, his voice low. "I want to believe you, Emily, but it's a lot." His honesty stung, but it was real, and I clung to it. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll wait." He nodded, his eyes holding mine, a flicker of the man who'd proposed under a starlit sky, promising forever. Margaret watched, her lips a thin line, but she stayed silent, her control slipping. Robert cleared his throat, his hands clasping together. I kept some of your old sketches," he said, his voice breaking. "I never stopped thinking about you." His words were a stone in my chest, heavy with years of silence. I wanted to ask why he hadn't called, why he'd let me grow up feeling unlovable, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who'd run from his own failures, not just mine. The crowd's chatter grew, glasses clinking, the band tuning for another song. A guest, an old neighbor of Ethan's, approached with a hesitant smile, asking about my firm's work. His curiosity was genuine, a small bridge to a world that might accept me. But as I answered, my eyes drifted to Ethan, to Robert, to the empty space where Clara had stood. The truth had set me free, but it had also carved a new kind of loneliness, one I hadn't expected. I stood there, the altar solid beneath me. Ethan's gaze, a tether. Robert's regret, a shadow. The room moved on, but I felt still caught in the echo of my own choices. My heart was open, raw, and the weight of what came next settled like dust, quiet but undeniable. Weeks had passed since my wedding, and I was 32, sitting alone in my Chicago office, the city's skyline a quiet glow through the window. The chaos of that day, Clara's accusations, Ethan's doubt my truth laid bare, felt like a storm that had settled, leaving a new kind of calm. My desk was cluttered with sketches, client notes, a half-empty coffee mug, signs of a life I was finally living openly. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and let the stillness wrap around me. The firm was busier than ever. After the wedding, word spread, clients called curious about the designer who owned her truth. I'd landed a contract with a local theater designing posters that now lined the streets. Each one felt like a small rebellion against the years I'd hidden my work. I traced a finger over a draft, its bold lines a reminder of what I'd fought for. The office was silent, but it hummed with possibility, a space I'd carved for myself. Ethan and I were finding our way. He'd stayed that night after the guests danced, and the band played on, and we'd talked until dawn, my voice hoarse from honesty. He was still hurt, but he listened, his hand warm in mine. Now we were planning a quiet honeymoon, a road trip to the Smoky Mountains, just us and the open road. I smiled, picturing him packing his laugh when I teased his overfilled suitcase. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I thought about Hannah, who'd started a blog after the wedding, writing about living authentically. Her first post mentioned me not by name, but I recognized the story. A friend stood up, she wrote, and showed me, "Truth is worth the risk." I'd read it late one night, tears blurring the screen, grateful for her unwavering belief in me. She was coming over tomorrow, bringing takeout, ready to plan a new project together. Her friendship was a constant, a light I hadn't always seen. Diane had visited last week, her first time in my office. She'd stood by the door, her coat clutched, tight eyes, scanning my awards on the wall. "I didn't know you could do this," she said, her voice small. I'd nodded, offering her a chair, but kept my distance. She talked about her own regrets, how she'd pushed Clara to fill her own gaps. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a start. I listened, my hands steady, no longer needing her validation to feel whole. A memory surfaced, soft and unbidden. I was 24, walking along Lake Michigan, the wind sharp against my face. I'd just finished my first freelance gig, a small logo for a bakery, and the owner had paid me in cash, her smile wide. I'd stood by the water, clutching the bills, feeling like I could breathe for the first time. I hadn't told anyone, not Mom, not Clara, afraid they'd diminish it. Now I saw that moment as a seed, one that had grown into the life I was living. The office phone blinked with a new message, but I let it wait. Outside, a street lamp flickered, casting shadows across my desk. I picked up a pencil, sketching absent-mindedly a curve, a line, the start of something new. The act was simple, but it felt sacred, a quiet reclaiming of the girl who'd drawn in secret. I wasn't running anymore, not from Mom's expectations, Clara's rivalry, or my own doubts. I thought about Clara, her absence, a strange ache. She'd sent a letter a few days ago, brief, her handwriting uneven. "I'm sorry," it began, then rambled about therapy, about untangling her jealousy. I hadn't replied yet, the words still settling in my mind. I didn't hate her, not anymore, but trust was a bridge we'd need time to rebuild. For now, her letter sat in a drawer, a weight I wasn't ready to carry. The skyline glowed brighter, the city alive beyond my window. I set the pencil down, my sketch unfinished, and leaned back, letting the quiet hold me. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time, that was enough. I closed my eyes, the hum of the world fading, and breathed slow and deep into the space I'd made. The quiet of my office held me, a soft cocoon against the city's hum. I was 32, my life reshaped by a wedding that broke me open and a truth that set me free. The sketch on my desk lay unfinished, its lines bold but unhurried, like a promise I could keep later. I stood, my bare feet cool on the hardwood, and walked to the window, the skyline a map of lights that felt like home. I'd started writing back to Clara yesterday, my pen hesitant at first. "I'm not ready to forgive," I wrote, "but I'm ready to talk." The words were plain, no anger, no weight, just a door cracked open. I'd mailed the letter this morning, slipping it into a blue mailbox on my way to work. The act was small, but it felt like loosening a knot one tied by years of rivalry and pain. I didn't need her to be my sister again, not yet, but I needed to let go of the fight. Robert had called last week, his voice tentative, asking to meet. I'd agreed, and we'd sat in a diner, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that burned your tongue. He'd brought a box old and taped filled with my childhood art crayons, suns, pencil trees, things I'd forgotten I'd made. I kept them. He said, his hands shaking. I'd taken the box, my fingers brushing the worn edges, and said, "Thank you." It wasn't absolution, but it was enough for now. He'd joined my firm as a consultant, sketching layouts with me, his laugh a sound I was learning to trust. I thought about Ethan, how we'd spent last weekend walking through a park, leaves crunching under our boots. He'd stopped by a pond, skipping a stone across the water, and said, "I'm proud of you." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of our rebuilt trust. We weren't the couple we'd been before the wedding, but we were something better, flawed, honest, choosing each other every day. I'd tucked a leaf from that walk into my journal, a reminder of what we'd grown through. Nathan had pitched a new project today, a collaboration with a local museum. "You're the heart of this," he'd said, his grin wide. I'd nodded the compliment, settling without the old need to prove myself. The team was thriving, our office a buzz of ideas, and I was leading not as a lawyer or a lie, but as me. A client had sent flowers yesterday, a thank you for a campaign that had boosted their sales. The card read, "You're a visionary." I'd set the bouquet by my desk, its petals a soft pink, and felt a warmth I hadn't chased. A memory drifted up, clear and gentle. I was 27, sitting in a tiny cafe after signing my first big contract. The barista had drawn a heart in my latte foam, and I'd smiled alone, but content, knowing I'd made something real. I hadn't needed Mom's praise or Clara's envy to feel it. That girl was still in me, and now she was free to breathe, to create, to be. I turned from the window, my reflection faint in the glass. The city stretched beyond, alive and indifferent. But I felt part of it, rooted in a way I hadn't before. I walked back to my desk, picking up the sketch again, adding a single line, a curve that felt like a beginning. The office was still, the world outside a distant hum, and I sat, my hands steady, my heart quiet. I'd hosted an art workshop last weekend, a small event for local kids. One girl, maybe 10, had shown me her drawing a messy, vibrant bird. "Is it good?" she'd asked, her eyes wide. I'd knelt beside her, smiling. "It's yours. That's what makes it perfect." Her grin had stayed with me, a mirror to the freedom I was finding. I didn't need to be more than I was, not anymore. The clock on my wall ticked, its rhythm soft. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and looked at the sketch, the flowers, the city beyond. My life was a canvas marked by mistakes and mended by truth. I closed my eyes, the quiet wrapping me like a shawl, and let myself rest whole in a way I'd never been. 6 months had passed since my wedding, and I was 32, sitting on my apartment balcony, a mug of tea warming my hands. Chicago's morning buzz drifted up, a steady hum of traffic and life. The air was crisp, autumn settling in, and I pulled my sweater tighter, watching the leaves drift across the street. My life wasn't a grand triumph, no fairy tale ending, but it was mine, pieced together, with quiet moments like this, each one a step towards something whole. My design firm was thriving, not in a flashy way, but steady. I'd signed a new client last week, a small bookstore wanting a website that felt like home. We'd spent hours talking, their passion for stories, sparking ideas I hadn't touched in years. I'd come home that night and sketched for hours, not for work, but for me. Abstract shapes, soft colors, a release I'd forgotten I needed. The sketches hung on my wall now, unframed, a reminder I could create without fear. Ethan and I were married, our bond deeper for its scars. We'd spent last weekend repainting our living room, a soft blue he'd picked. Paint had splattered my hair, and he'd laughed, wiping it away with a rag, his touch gentle. We didn't talk about the wedding much anymore, but when we did, it was honest, no gloss, just truth. He'd started therapy too, working through his own doubts, and I loved him more for it, for choosing us, despite the mess. I'd started running in the mornings, a new habit. The lakefront path was my refuge, the rhythm of my sneakers a kind of meditation. I wasn't fast, but I was consistent each step away to meet myself. Yesterday, I'd stopped by the water, catching my breath, and noticed a duck gliding across the surface, effortless. I'd smiled not because it was profound, but because I could notice it could be present without the old weight of pretending. Diane and I were talking more, not often, but enough. She'd come to my office again, bringing a potted plant, her hands nervous as she set it down. "It's for your desk," she said, her voice soft. I'd thanked her, and we'd sat sipping coffee, sharing small stories, hers, about a book club, mine about a client. It wasn't a full repair, but it was a start, a thread we were weaving slowly. I didn't need her to be the mother I'd wanted, just the one she could be. Robert was a regular now, stopping by the firm with coffee, his sketches sharper than I'd expected. We'd worked on a project together last month, a logo for a community center. He'd suggested a bold font, and I'd listened, surprised by how easy it felt to collaborate. We didn't talk about the years he was gone, not yet. But his presence was a quiet gift, one I accepted without forcing it to mean more. I thought about Clara sometimes. Her letter still unanswered beyond my brief reply. She'd moved to a new city, started a job, was working on herself, or so Hannah heard. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't miss her either. The space she'd left was a chance to know myself without her shadow. I'd written a note to myself last night, tucked in my journal. "You don't have to compete to exist." It was simple, but it held me. The tea had cooled, and I set the mug down, my hands resting on the balcony railing. The city stretched out a canvas of lives, crossing each one messy and real. I'd spent so long hiding, building a version of myself to please others. Now I was just Emily, flawed and enough. The thought settled soft as the morning light, and I let it linger. My breath slow, the world steady around me. The morning light grew stronger, painting the balcony in soft gold. I was 32, my life a quiet mosaic of choices and truths, each piece hard-won. I leaned against the railing, the city's pulse steady below, and thought about the woman I'd been, a girl who'd hidden her heart to feel enough. That woman was still part of me, but I'd learned to hold her gently, to let her rest. My hands traced the railing's cool edge, and I exhaled, ready to carry what I'd found. Last night, I'd hosted a dinner at our apartment, a small gathering of new and old. Ethan had grilled vegetables, his apron stained with sauce, while Hannah poured wine, her laughter filling the room. Nathan brought a playlist, and Sophie, the girl who'd once followed Clara, came too shy but curious. We'd talked about ordinary things, movies, whether a new mural downtown. But it felt sacred, like we were building something real. Sophie had lingered after showing me a sketch she'd done, a simple flower. "I'm trying," she said, her voice small. I'd nodded, touching her shoulder. "That's all it takes." I'd started journaling again, not for clients or deadlines, but for myself. Each night, I'd write a single truth, something I'd felt, learned, or let go. Yesterday's was, "I don't need to be perfect to be loved." The words were plain, but they anchored me, a compass for the days when doubt crept back. I'd tucked the journal beside my bed, its pages a map of who I was becoming, not who I'd pretended to be. Clara and I had met for coffee last month, our first talk since her letter. She'd sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes tired but clear. "I was jealous," she said, her voice low. "You left, and I stayed, and I hated how you made it look easy." I'd listened, my heart steady, and said, "It was never easy." We didn't hug, didn't promise to be close, but we parted with a nod, a fragile truce. I didn't need her to be my sister in the old way, but I could let her be human. I thought about forgiveness, not the loud kind, but the quiet one that comes when you stop carrying the hurt. I'd forgiven Clara, not for her, but for me to free the space her anger had claimed. I'd forgiven Diane, too, for the years she'd overlooked me, and Robert for the years he'd been gone. Most of all, I'd forgiven myself for the lie I'd told, for the years I'd spent proving what I already was. That forgiveness was a gift, not to others, but to the woman standing here, breathing in the morning air. The lesson I'd learned wasn't grand, but it was true. Freedom comes when you stop hiding from yourself. We all wear masks, lawyer, perfect daughter, golden child, because we think they'll save us. But they don't. They chain us to a version of ourselves we can't sustain. Letting go of mine standing raw in that wedding chaos taught me that truth isn't just a word, it's a lifeline. It's the courage to say, "This is me," and mean it, even when the world might turn away. I stepped back inside the balcony door, clicking shut. My tea was cold, but I didn't mind. I sat at the table, pulling a blank page from my notebook, and wrote one word, enough. It was all I needed to carry forward a reminder that I was and always had been enough. The city hummed outside, the day unfolding, and I felt ready not for a perfect life, but for one that was mine. I'd love to hear from you now. What truth have you held back, and what would it feel like to let it go? Share your story in the comments. It might just light the way for someone else. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for listening, for being here. May you find your own quiet strength today.